a queen who spent the equivalent of $3.5 million a year on clothes while her people starved. A king who couldn't even open a door by himself because protocol demanded a servant do it for him. And a country that was so broke it couldn't even afford bread. What happens when you push 28 million people to the edge? They don't just protest, they change the entire world. This is the French Revolution.
French history has been marked by several violent and bloody revolutions.
The French Revolution is this extraordinary moment when people began to believe that you could actually recreate almost everything in a society.
And a new republic would be born in blood. The blood of the French Revolution.
And I promise you, it is nothing like what you learned in school. Let's go back, way back, to the 1600s and 1700s. Close your eyes and imagine the world then. There are no elections, no presidents, no democracies. The concept doesn't even exist yet, not practically anyway. The world is ruled by kings, and these kings believe, with complete seriousness, that God personally chose them to rule. This idea had an actual name, the divine right of kings. Think about that for a second. If the king said, "God told me to do this," who's going to argue? The church? The church agreed with him. The army? The king controlled it. This wasn't just France. This was the entire world. India had the Mughals, China had emperors, the Ottoman Empire stretched across 3 continents. And inside every one of these societies, the same structure. At the top, the rulers, the kings, the nobility, the aristocracy. In the middle, the clergy, the priests, the bishops, the religious guardians. At the bottom, everyone else, the farmers, the workers, the 98%. And here's the part that's truly mind-blowing. Most people accepted this. For thousands of years, they believed their suffering was God's will. Their poverty was punishment for past sins. The king was divine, the system was eternal. That is, until a few dangerous men picked up their pen. In the 1600s, something started shifting in Europe. Call it the Age of Enlightenment. For the first time in history on a large scale, people started asking why. Why does the king get to rule? Who exactly gave him that right? René Descartes, a French philosopher, said something radical. He said, "I think, therefore I am." The very act of thinking makes you a human being, not your title, not your bloodline, your mind. Galileo pointed his telescope at Jupiter and saw its moons orbiting around it. He concluded the Earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around, as the church had insisted for centuries. The church was furious. They sentenced him to life imprisonment. But you can't imprison an idea. Then came John Locke, and this man, sitting in England in the 1600s, wrote this sentence that would eventually blow up the French monarchy. He said, "All men are born equal. No man has the right to rule another, and if a government fails its people, the people have the right to overthrow it." Read that again. That wasn't Jefferson. That wasn't the American Constitution. That was John Locke, a century earlier. And in France, Rousseau added fuel to the fire with one devastating line: "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." These weren't just philosophical musings. These were sparks. And France was a room full of gunpowder. Now, let me introduce you to the 2 people who made the revolution inevitable. King Louis XVI became king at 20 years old. He was shy, awkward, indecisive. He preferred locksmithing as a hobby. That's not a joke. The King of France genuinely loved fixing locks. He inherited a country that was already drowning in debt from wars with Britain. France had even funded the American Revolution, partly to weaken Britain, and it had nearly bankrupted them. Then came the bad harvests. Bread prices skyrocketed. A single loaf of bread cost what a working man earned in an entire week. And what did Louis do? He built more at the Palace of Versailles. He threw parties. He hosted balls. And honestly, if Louis was the problem, his wife Marie Antoinette was the symbol of the problem. Marie Antoinette was Austrian-born, and from the moment she arrived in France, she was a spectacle. She ordered 300 new dresses every single year. She had exclusive perfumes made just for her. She redesigned the gardens of Versailles, reportedly spending the equivalent of millions today on landscaping alone. And her hairstyles. Oh, her hairstyles. There is a famous portrait where she literally has a model ship built into her hair, a ship on her head. But here's where it gets politically explosive. Marie was having an affair. She exchanged love letters with a Swedish nobleman, Count Axel von Fersen. Now remember, for centuries people believed kings and queens were chosen by God, sacred, divine. But when the pamphlets and newspapers started printing stories of the queen's affairs, people thought, if she's chosen by God, why is she acting like this? The divine myth shattered, and the nickname Paris gave her said everything. They stopped calling her the Queen of France. They called her Madame Deficit. By the late 1780s, France was in full crisis. Louis tried to fix the finances. He hired economist Jacques Turgot, a free market thinker who believed the government should stop controlling grain prices. Let the market decide, he said. The result? Grain merchants bought up all the grain, held it, then sold it at 5 times the price. People were starving. Riots broke out in 1775, called the Flour War. Literally, riots over flour. Turgot then suggested taxing the nobility and clergy to fix the budget. The nobility and clergy had him fired within months. This kept happening. Every finance minister who suggested a fair tax was removed by the powerful elite. Finally, Louis called a meeting, a body called the Estates General, that hadn't met since 1614. That's 175 years of silence. The Estates General had 3 groups: the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. Each group got 1 vote. So 2% of the population, the clergy and nobility, always outvoted 98% of the people. The commoners said, "This is insane. Give us 1 vote per person." Louis ignored them. So the commoners did something radical. They walked out. They found a nearby tennis court, locked themselves inside, and swore an oath. They would not leave until France had a new constitution. This moment, June 20, 1789, is called the Tennis Court Oath, and it is arguably the birth of modern democracy. Louis panicked. He locked them out of buildings. He threatened them. But by then, the crowd outside was millions strong, and even his own soldiers were beginning to question their orders. July 14th, 1789, the date that changed everything. Rumors spread through Paris that Louis was planning a military crackdown, that he was going to crush the National Assembly with force. Thousands of Parisians decided to act first. They stormed the Bastille, a royal prison that symbolized the king's absolute power. They found only 7 prisoners inside, but they found gunpowder, they found weapons, and they found something even more powerful, the feeling that they could win. From this day forward, 14th July is celebrated as France's National Day, Bastille Day. The revolution spread like wildfire. Farmers refused to pay taxes. Tax collectors were chased off their lands. Nobles began fleeing France by the thousands. In October, thousands of women, driven by hunger, marched 13 kilometers on foot from Paris to the Palace of Versailles. They stormed the palace gates. They screamed at the king and queen directly. Louis finally signed the Constitution, and by 1792, the monarchy was abolished entirely. France was now a republic. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were put on trial. They were convicted, and in January 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine in a public square in Paris. Marie Antoinette followed that October. The king and queen, chosen by God, executed by their own people.
So, was the French Revolution a success or a failure? A king and queen were executed. A republic was created. A reign of terror killed 40,000 people. And then a new emperor took the throne. On the surface, it looks messy, chaotic, even tragic. But beneath the surface, beneath all the blood and chaos, something irreversible happened. People learned that they had power, that kings are not gods, that systems can be changed, that liberty is not a gift from above, it must be demanded, sometimes at great cost. Every constitution in the world today carries a DNA strand from Paris, 1789. Every time you vote, every time you protest, every time you demand equal treatment under the law, you are living in the world the French Revolution built. Man is born free,
And now, at least in theory, he doesn't have to live in chains. If you found this video valuable, hit like and share it with someone who loves history. And if you want to go deeper, we've got videos on the American Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, and the Age of Enlightenment. Links in the description. See you in the next one.